Frank, 74, gets the call he's been waiting for, an invitation to Thanksgiving with his family after years of silence. But when he arrives, no one shows up. Frank Parker zipped up his worn coat and sat back in the cracked leather seat of the taxi, staring out the window as snowflakes blinked across the glass like fireflies. Chicago, cold, loud, and bursting with life. But today, something felt still, like the city knew this visit meant something different. He clutched his phone like a lifeline, still seeing the message glowing on the screen. "Fly out, Dad. We want you here for Thanksgiving. Love, Emily." He had read it 100 times. 5 words that had cracked open the dam of 5 silent years. 5 years since the fight. 5 years since that impossible Thanksgiving, when he'd said the wrong thing about her husband, or maybe the right thing said the wrong way. It didn't matter now. She'd called. They wanted him back. The taxi slowed at the terminal curb. He paid the driver, stepped out into the biting wind, and squinted through the white haze. Emily had said they'd pick him up. He checked the time. 5 minutes passed when they were supposed to be here, then 10, then 20. His fingers began to numb as he clutched the handle of his modest carry-on. Passengers came and went, families reunited with tearful hugs, kids climbed into back seats buzzing with energy. And still, no one for Frank. He tried calling, no answer. Then again, still nothing. So he opened the photo app, and there it was. A fresh Thanksgiving post from Emily's husband, Jason. A long table set with food, wine glasses raised mid-toast, the caption a cheerful, "Grateful for this family today." There was Emily at the head of the table, the grandkids smiling beside her, Jason carving the turkey. Frank stared. His name wasn't in the caption. There was no seat left for him. No message explaining anything. Just silence. The phone slipped from his fingers and landed in a soft puff of snow by his shoe. He picked it up slowly, brushing off the wet flakes, and stared at the reflection of his wrinkled face in the black screen. Something inside him wavered. Hurt swelled up like water behind a dam, but he didn't let it break. Not here, not yet. He turned slowly, dragging his suitcase behind him, and started walking. He didn't know where. Maybe to a motel. Maybe just to kill some time before figuring out a way home. The city was large, but Frank knew how to move through it like a ghost. He'd spent a life learning how to disappear quietly when the world no longer wanted him. It was after dark by the time he reached the edge of town. Snow covered the sidewalk like a shroud, muffling the world. Lampposts stood haloed in golden light. Frank walked past shuttered shops and cracked brick buildings, his breath billowing out in slow, ragged clouds. His legs ached, his heart more so. And then he saw it. A diner. It wasn't the kind of place you could miss. A faded red neon sign buzzed gently in the snowlight. Evelyn's. He blinked. Evelyn. That had been his wife's name. The windows were fogged with a warmth, a soft glow leaking out from behind half-drawn curtains. It looked old, but well kept. The kind of place that shouldn't still be open. The kind of place you only found in dreams or memories. He hesitated, then stepped inside. A bell above the door jingled softly, and warmth wrapped around him like a blanket. The smell of coffee, grease, and cinnamon filled the air. Booths lined the wall, red leather like a postcard from the 1950s. A jukebox in the corner crackled to life with a familiar melody. The slow, aching croon of strangers in the night. Their song, his and Evelyn's. Frank stood still, stunned. "Frank Parker?" came a voice. He turned. A waitress in her early 50s with greying curls pulled into a loose bun smiled at him from behind the counter. Her name tag read Rosie. "Been a long time," she said warmly, as though they were old friends. Frank tried to find words. Do I know you?" She poured him a cup of coffee and motioned to a booth. "Take a seat. It's cold out there." He moved slowly, easing into the booth nearest the jukebox. The warmth soaked into his bones. He wrapped his hands around the mug. It was real, solid, warm. "I wasn't expecting company tonight," Rosie said, sitting across from him with a wink. "But some folks show up when they're supposed to." Frank gave a breath of a laugh. "I didn't even know where I was going." "You do now." He looked around again. "This place. How long's it been here?" "Longer than you'd think." She refilled his cup without asking. "What brought you in tonight?" He shook his head. "Flight from LA to see my daughter. They told me to come, said they wanted me back, but they forgot to mean it." Rosie's eyes softened. "That's a hard thing." Frank looked at the jukebox. "She used to dance to this in the kitchen. Evelyn, my wife, made the kids crazy. She didn't care. Said if you stop dancing, you start dying." "Smart woman," Rosie said. "You lost her?" "Cancer, 15 years ago." Rosie nodded like she already knew. "She'd be proud you came." Frank blinked, unsure how she meant it. "You said my name before I said anything." "I did." He stared at her, suddenly wary. But Rosie just smiled, soft and full of something unspoken. "Let me get you some pie," she said. "Pumpkin, still warm." She disappeared into the back. Frank sat back in the booth, staring out at the snow beyond the fogged window. Strangers in the night faded into something slower. Something wordless and orchestral, and just as familiar. He reached for the check when she brought the pie, but under the plate was already a small folded note. His fingers trembled as he opened it. "You were always meant to find this place." He looked up, but Rosie was gone, and the diner was suddenly quieter, as if it were holding its breath. Frank sat perfectly still. The hum of the diner's fluorescent lights overhead seemed to stretch into silence, like a distant echo. Outside, the snow fell heavier now, thick and slow, like confetti in reverse. Inside, the warmth held steady. But there was something else, too. A stillness so complete it almost buzzed in his ears. He stared down at the note again. "You were always meant to find this place." No signature, just that one sentence typed in clean, deliberate strokes. The paper was stiff, not the flimsy kind from a receipt printer, but almost like stationery. He turned it over, blank on the other side. "Rosie," he called. No answer. Frank rose cautiously and peered toward the kitchen window behind the counter, but it was dark. No movement. The air no longer smelled of pie or cinnamon, just that faint trace of something floral and powdery, like Evelyn's perfume. He shook his head. He was tired, jet-lagged, maybe even dreaming. Maybe he'd nodded off at the curb and this whole place was just some sad hallucination cooked up by his bruised heart. He slipped the note into his coat pocket and turned back toward the booth. But the pie was gone, the plate, the fork, the coffee mug, all gone. Frank stood frozen in place, his eyes sweeping the diner. Everything looked the same, and yet subtly different. The neon glow had dimmed a little. The jukebox had stopped playing. The booths were no longer perfect in their symmetry. One near the back was torn at the seams, another had its table flipped sideways like someone had left in a hurry. Dust now clung to the floor under his boots. It was as if the diner had aged in the blink of an eye. His heart kicked once in his chest, then again harder, faster. "Hello?" he called, more sharply now. A door creaked open behind the counter. Rosie didn't return. Instead, a man stepped out, tall, with a neatly trimmed grey beard and deep, familiar eyes. He wore a white apron and a short-sleeved shirt, despite the cold. Frank stared. "Carl?" he whispered. "Carl Mendel?" The man gave a small smile. "You remember?" Frank took a step back. Carl Mendel had been his old friend, a Navy buddy. They'd shared bunk rooms, cigars, and stories during shore leave. Frank had stood at Carl's funeral in 1987, folded the flag with his own hands. "You're dead," Frank said hoarsely. Carl nodded, not unkindly. "That's true." Frank backed into the edge of the counter, knocking into a napkin holder. It clattered to the floor with a metallic ring, but no one came. "I'm dreaming," he said. "Or I've had a stroke." "You're not dreaming," Carl replied gently. "You're here because you needed to be. Because it was time." Frank reached for the door behind him, but when he turned, it wasn't there. The entrance, the same one he'd come through, was gone. The front windows now showed nothing but darkness beyond, as if the snow had swallowed the world whole. Carl stepped forward, but slowly, hands raised like he meant no harm. "I know this is hard. The diner isn't always open, not for everyone, only when the time's right." "The time for what?" Carl smiled again, softer now. "To let go, or to hold on. That's up to you." Frank's breathing slowed, but only slightly. "I don't understand." "Sit," Carl said, motioning back toward the booth. "Let me explain." Frank hesitated, then moved slowly back to the red leather bench. He sat down, hands flat on the table. It was still warm. Carl sat across from him. "This place isn't a diner. Not really. It just takes the shape of what you need to see." Frank stared. "Then what is it?" Carl looked toward the jukebox, then back. A way station, a resting point, a crossroads. Call it what you want. You came here because your heart needed something more than what the world was giving. Frank rubbed his eyes. "I came because my family left me sitting in the snow like a stray dog. And you walked through the dark looking for something. That's what matters." Frank blinked at him, exhausted. "Why now? Why me?" "Because you were ready," Carl said simply. "You've been holding too much for too long. Grief, guilt, anger, all of it. Evelyn knew it. That's why she left the note." Frank flinched. "You're saying Evelyn is here?" Carl didn't answer, just looked at him kindly. "You want coffee?" Frank hesitated, then nodded. Carl stood and moved behind the counter. He poured 2 mugs and brought them back, placing one in front of Frank. It smelled exactly like the coffee Evelyn used to make. Rich, dark, a pinch of cinnamon. A habit she'd picked up during their honeymoon in Santa Fe. Frank's hands trembled as he lifted the mug to his lips. Why did she tell me I was meant to find this place? Because she always knew you'd need it. She couldn't be there to hold your hand, so she left you a breadcrumb, a thread. Frank closed his eyes. The warmth of the coffee settled in his chest like a memory. "When do I wake up?" he asked. Carl gave a sad smile. "That's the thing, Frank. You're not asleep. This is real. Real enough. The choice is yours now. You can go back, Walk out that door if you're ready to find it again. But before you do, there's something else." Frank looked up. Carl nodded toward the back of the diner. "Go on, she's waiting." The room seemed to bend slightly, the lights flickering in a slow rhythm. Frank stood slowly, his legs unsteady. He turned toward the back hallway. It hadn't been there before, but now it was. He stepped forward, one foot in front of the other, like he was walking into the past. At the end of the hallway was a single door. He reached out and opened it, and there, sitting at a small round table by a window that overlooked a golden field lit by sunlight, not snow, was Evelyn. She looked exactly as she had when they first met, and she was smiling. Frank froze in the doorway. Evelyn turned slightly, her face lit with that gentle, knowing smile he hadn't seen in 15 years. Her dark auburn hair was pulled up in the same loose twist she always wore when she baked. She wore her favourite green cardigan, the one she'd knitted herself back when the kids were little, and the same delicate silver chain around her neck, the locket he'd given her the year their son was born. "Hello, love," she said softly, as if no time had passed at all. Frank felt the ground shift beneath him, like the air had thickened with memory. The moment held him there, not out of fear, but reverence. His throat clenched tight, and words abandoned him. She stood up from the table, crossed the room, and wrapped her arms around him. Frank gasped. She was solid, warm. Her scent, lilac and cinnamon, enveloped him like a time capsule broken open. "I missed you so much," he whispered, voice cracking. Evelyn pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. "I know. I missed you too." He touched her face gently like porcelain. "You look just like you did the day we met." She laughed. That musical laugh that had once filled every corner of their little house. "And you, my Frank, look like a man who's carried the world on his back." He glanced down. "I feel like one." Evelyn took his hand and led him to the table by the window. As they sat, the field beyond seemed to ripple with a warm breeze, golden stalks of wheat bowing gently in waves. The sky was a soft peach orange, like a sunset that never quite faded. "I don't understand," Frank said at last. "What is this place, Evie? Really?" She rested her chin in her palm, studying him. "It's what you needed it to be. It finds people when they're ready, sometimes on the edge of something, sometimes at the end." "Am I dying?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. She reached across the table and touched his chest with 2 fingers. "No, Frank, just lost." He exhaled. The knot in his chest loosened a fraction. "You were always strong," Evelyn said. "Even after I was gone. You stayed steady, even when the kids pulled away, even when you felt alone." Frank's eyes misted. "I wasn't strong. I was just stubborn." "You love too hard. That's not a flaw." Frank looked down at his calloused hands. "Emily invited me, said they wanted me there, but they didn't. I sat on a curb like a fool while they posted pictures of dinner." Evelyn's smile faded into something softer, more solemn. "They're hurt too, Frank. You said things you couldn't take back, and they said nothing for too long. But it doesn't mean you were wrong to go. It means you're still trying." "I don't know if I can forgive them," he admitted. "You don't have to, not yet. But don't let that stop you from living." Frank looked at her. "You think I should go back?" "I think you came here for a reason. To remember something." "Remember what?" She stood again, and this time she opened the locket around her neck. Inside were 2 tiny photographs. One of Frank, laughing, the other of their daughter Emily as a baby. "Remember who you are when you're not trying to carry it all alone," she said. "Remember that being forgotten doesn't mean you're gone." Frank's eyes brimmed with tears. "I don't want to lose you again." "You haven't," she said, her voice warm with certainty. "I'm with you. Always. Every time you hum our song. Every time you look at the stars. Every time you tell a story and laugh out loud even when no one else is listening." She stepped forward and placed the locket in his hand. "You don't have to say goodbye. Just see you later." The sunlight through the window grew brighter, and the field outside seemed to stretch infinitely in every direction. Evelyn cupped his cheek, then leaned forward and kissed his forehead. "Time to go home, Frank." He blinked, and he was back in the booth. The diner was warm again. The jukebox played softly. The pie had returned, a perfect wedge of pumpkin with a dollop of cream. Rosie stood behind the counter, wiping a glass with a towel, humming quietly. Frank sat there, breath caught in his chest, heart thudding. In his hand was the silver locket. He opened it. 2 photographs stared back at him, his own and a baby-faced Emily. Tears streamed freely now. He held the locket against his chest, closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank you." He left the diner just as dawn broke over the city. The snow had stopped. The streets were empty and clean. The world blanketed in silence and light. Frank walked for a long time, not toward the airport, but toward a payphone near an old gas station. He dialed the number from memory. It rang once, then again. Then a voice, sleepy and unsure. "Hello?" "Emily," he said. "It's Dad." There was a pause, a breath. Then a small, trembling voice on the other end. "Dad? Oh my God, Frank closed his eyes, the rising sun warming his face. "I think we need to talk," he said. And this time someone was listening. The silence on the other end of the line wasn't the kind that came from distance. It was the silence of a heart hesitating, balancing between the weight of memory and the sudden ache of possibility. "Yeah," Emily finally said. "We do." Frank let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The phone cord twisted in his hand as he leaned against the glass booth, watching his own reflection stare back at him in the scratched metal frame. Frank let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The phone cord twisted in his hand as he leaned against the glass booth, watching his own reflection stare back at him in the scratched metal frame. "I didn't mean to just show up like that," he said, a voice quiet but steady. "I thought maybe you really wanted me there. I thought it was time." "I did," she said quickly. "I mean, I do. I didn't know you'd actually come. I figured you'd ignore the message. You always—" She stopped herself, like catching a fragment of anger before it could cut both of them. Frank didn't flinch. "Yeah, I guess I've been good at walking away, haven't I?" Another pause. Then, "You weren't the only one. We all did. I should have called. Should have said something real." "I'm sorry," Frank said simply, "for what I said that night about Jason. I was angry, scared, but I never meant to drive a wedge between us." "You didn't," she whispered. "Not really. It was already there. You just made it louder." Frank nodded slowly. "You all looked happy in that photo." There was a long, shaky breath on the other end. "That's not the whole picture. We missed you. The kids kept asking if you were coming. I didn't know what to say. I panicked. Then Jason posted the picture without realizing you were already in town. When I saw it, I ran out the back door. Frank blinked. You... what? I drove to the airport. You weren't there. Your flight had already landed. I didn't know where you went. I thought you'd flown right back. He looked around at the sleeping city. The snow glowed orange and gold under the morning light. I didn't. I walked. I ended up somewhere else. There was a silence, curious and heavy. Frank didn't try to explain. Not yet. How could he? I want to come see you, Emily said. If that's okay. The kids want to see you. We can do a second Thanksgiving. We'll call it a make-up. Frank smiled, warm and genuine, the first real smile in a long while. That sounds like a pretty good deal. I'll come get you, she said. Just tell me where you are. He looked up at the street sign above the payphone. There was none. He stepped out of the booth and turned in a slow circle. The diner was gone, not boarded up, not closed, gone. Just an empty lot, blanketed in untouched snow. Not even footprints where he'd walked. No tire tracks, no neon sign. Just sky and quiet and stillness. Dad? He turned back to the phone. I'm at a gas station near some place I used to know. I'll walk toward the train station. Meet me there. Okay, she said, and don't go anywhere else. He chuckled. I'm not much of a runner these days. They hung up. Frank turned and started walking again. He didn't look back. Later that morning, as trains roared and people bustled through the revived energy of the waking city, Frank sat on a bench beside an old bronze statue of some forgotten civic hero. His suitcase beside him, his coat buttoned tight. He held the locket in his hand, thumbing the delicate hinge again and again. Evelyn's voice echoed in his memory. You don't have to say goodbye. Just see you later. When he looked up, Emily was there, standing a few feet away, bundled in a heavy coat, her eyes red from crying. Behind her, Jason held the hands of their two children, a girl about 9, a boy maybe 6, both staring at him like he was something from a book they hadn't finished reading yet. Emily stepped forward first. Frank rose, slow and unsure, and then she wrapped her arms around him in a way she hadn't done since she was a teenager. I'm sorry, she whispered into his chest. He held her like something precious returned from the sea. Me too. They took the train back together. The kid sat beside him, firing questions like tiny journalists. Do you really live in California? Did you used to be in the Navy? Can you still swim? He answered each one with growing lightness, his voice warming with every mile. Later, over a table of leftovers and reheated turkey, laughter returned. Not the polished kind for company, but the quiet kind that comes when people begin to forgive. The kind of laughter that heals in small, quiet pieces. Frank caught a glimpse of the locket in his coat pocket and ran a thumb across it. He would tell them about the diner someday. Not today. For now it was enough to sit at a table that had once forgotten his name, and now spoke it again with love. Years later, long after Frank had passed peacefully in his sleep with the locket still on his nightstand, his granddaughter would take a late-night train through the same part of town. She'd had a fight with her mother, something petty, something painful. She got off 2 stops early, needing air, needing silence. The snow had just started falling when she saw it. A small, dimly lit diner sitting at the edge of a vacant lot. Its red neon sign buzzed gently. Evelyn's! She hesitated, then stepped inside. The bell above the door jingled. A waitress looked up and smiled. "Welcome," she said. "We've been waiting." The air inside Evelyn's was warmer than she expected. Not just the temperature, though it was that too, a comforting balm against the winter wind, but the feeling. It settled over her like a blanket from her childhood, one of those thick hand-knit ones that always smelled faintly of cinnamon and vanilla. The kind her grandfather Frank used to wrap around her shoulders after a bath, saying, "All bundled up like a burrito." She smiled at the memory. The diner was quiet. Only a few patrons filled the red vinyl booths, each seemingly lost in their own thoughts. A man in a trench coat stirred his coffee endlessly. A teenage girl scribbled poetry on a napkin. An elderly woman tapped her fingers along the edge of the formica table, keeping time to a tune only she could hear. The waitress who had greeted her approached, holding a coffee pot in one hand. She was older, with silver hair in a tight bun, and eyes that sparkled with something ancient. "Cold out tonight," she said. "Yeah," the girl replied. "I wasn't planning on stopping." The waitress smiled, pouring coffee without being asked. No one ever does. Not the first time. The girl blinked. "Excuse me?" "You'll want something sweet," the woman continued, ignoring the question. "We've got apple pie just out of the oven, and peach cobbler if you're feeling the weight of summer." I guess I'll have the apple," she said, the words tumbling out before she could decide if she was even hungry. The waitress nodded, then glanced at the locket around the girl's neck. "That's a beautiful piece. Family?" The girl touched it. It had once been her grandfather's, though he never said where it came from, only that it was a gift from someone he'd meet again someday. After he passed, it had somehow found its way into her hands. No note, no instructions, just the locket on her pillow like a final whisper. She opened it now, still the same two photographs. A man smiling with mischief in his eyes, and a baby-faced woman who, over the years, had started to look more and more like her. "My grandfather," she said. "Frank Parker." The waitress froze, just a fraction of a second, but she smiled wider after. "Frank," she said, like tasting a memory. "He liked the booth by the jukebox, always said the music helped him think." The girl's breath caught. "You knew him?" The waitress tilted her head. "Everyone who needs to be known is known here." She turned and walked toward the kitchen, leaving the girl stunned and wordless. The jukebox in the corner kicked on with a hum and a click. A slow, haunting melody filled the air. Not the usual upbeat diner fare, but something softer, familiar. Strings swelled, and a crooning voice followed, velvet smooth and old as time. "Strangers in the Night," her grandfather's favourite. Her eyes blurred. She hadn't heard that song in years. Not since the night he told her about her grandmother Evelyn, how she'd dance barefoot in the kitchen, how she'd hum this tune every time it rained. That story had always seemed more legend than memory, a fairy tale with a jukebox soundtrack. The waitress returned with a slice of pie and a note tucked beneath the plate. The girl hesitated. Her heart thudded once, hard. She pulled the note free, one line, typed, firm and clean. "You were always meant to find this place." Her hands trembled. She looked around the diner again, truly seeing it for the first time. The booth by the jukebox was empty, waiting. The man in the trench coat met her eyes for a moment and gave a small, knowing nod before disappearing behind a swinging door that hadn't been there a second earlier. The girl stood and walked slowly to the jukebox booth, lowering herself onto the seat. Her reflection stared back at her in the silver napkin holder, eyes wide, mouth parting to ask 100 questions she couldn't name. Then the waitress sat across from her. "Who are you?" the girl whispered. The waitress folded her hands. Someone who once needed this place too. Outside, snow fell in soft spirals. Inside, time slowed. And somewhere in the space between song and silence, memory and magic, the girl began to understand. This wasn't just a place for the forgotten. It was a place where people were remembered. If you enjoyed this story, please like and share. Thank you.